You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron. I'm Ethan Haristadoulou, and it is time to make some predictions for all 16 games of week number 18 in the NFL. I cannot believe we are at the end of the road for the regular season. It does not feel too long ago like we were kicking off the season, but here we are at one of the hardest weeks, in my opinion, between week 18 and week number 1. The tie is somewhere between those two of being the hardest games to predict for the season because week 1, you never really know. Week 18, I mean, so many players are not playing because of playoffs and just teams not needing to have teams play, and some teams are coming to play, but others are not coming to play. It's always a difficult week to go through. But as always, a reminder, I'm just a guy that likes to make some predictions. This is strictly for fun. Do what you wish with the information I share. And then also just something else. I have been sick as can be the last few days, battling through whatever it is that I have right now. So bear with me if my voice sounds off, if I clear my throat or something like that. Apologies ahead of time. But fire away in the comments. Let me hear from you all. Who do you like this week? Who do you dislike this week? What are you looking forward to in week 18? But the first game we'll start with, AFC North clash. Every single matchup this week is a divisional matchup, beginning with the Cleveland Browns going into Baltimore to take on the Ravens. Bailey Zappi is going to be the quarterback for Cleveland to finalize what has been a disaster of a season. We are going to get to see Patriots legend Bailey Zappi starting for the Browns. This is one of the wilder years I've seen for Cleveland, and that's saying a lot considering the Browns altogether, but I think it's very fitting that this year ends with Bailey Zappi at quarterback. Ravens, meanwhile, they're looking to lock up the division for a really, really tight AFC North race between them and the Steelers right now. Basically, a loss drops them into the 5 spot, and then, of course, there, Pittsburgh would leapfrog them, take a hold of the division there, get themselves a home game instead of Baltimore here. So a lot on the line here. The big thing for me really isn't even about the game, more so just the sour taste in the mouth that Baltimore probably still has from the first time that they played the Browns and came away with a loss against Jameis Winston. There was a lot of missed turnover opportunities by the defense coming up short in that 35-34 game. I cannot, in good faith, pick the Browns in the current state that they are. There's a lot of guys that are injured that are not expected to be playing on this side. Going into Baltimore as well, the atmosphere, it's not a playoff game per se, but there is going to be a big game kind of feel atmosphere for Baltimore's end simply because there is a lot on the line for them. So I would assume John Harbaugh has his team ready to go, has his team ready to not only beat the Browns, but probably stomp on their neck a little bit. And I like Baltimore 35-10 on this one here. I think that they are going to run away with it, put the hurt on Cleveland. This is a vastly different Browns team from the last time that these two teams played. And I think Baltimore not only is going to lock up that division, but they want to make a point to Cleveland as well to wrap up their regular season. The next matchup we're going to look at is another AFC North clash. We got AFC North games on Saturday. We have the Cincinnati Bengals going into Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers here. Now, here's the deal. If the Ravens win, nothing really changes for Pittsburgh. They are stuck where they are stuck. They will not be able to win the AFC North. Now, if Baltimore loses, things can change a lot. You have a little bit more of a motivated Pittsburgh Steelers team. That being said, on the flip side, you've got a Bengals team that is fighting for their playoff lives, and they will not know the state of their playoff hopes until the following day should they come away with a win, because the rest of the AFC seeding for that number 7 spot with Denver and, of course, Miami as well, they don't play till Sunday. So this is a very interesting game here because Pittsburgh will know just how much they need to bring in this one based off of what happens in the game prior. Now, the other thing I'm worried about with Pittsburgh is just the cracks that I feel like we are seeing from this team altogether, especially on the defensive side of things. And there have been some injuries over the last few weeks, like missing Joey Porter Jr., who I think is a key cog to that defense in the secondary, but allowing a total of about 400 yards per game and 30 points per game in their last 3 games against Baltimore, Philadelphia, Kansas City, some really good teams, if I do say so myself, that are, coincidentally enough, all going to be playoff teams. So there is, I think, a reason for concern with what's going on in Pittsburgh, especially defensively right now. Meanwhile, Cincinnati, they're on an offensive tear, and they have been for quite some time now. Basically going back through their last 8 games here, Cincinnati's averaging over 410 yards per game with 499 that they put up against a pretty good Denver Broncos defense last week. And on top of that, they're averaging about 32 points per game. This is not a team that's messing around or playing around. And as I mentioned, this is a potent offense going up against a defense that's showing some cracks. I think Joey Porter Jr. being back in the fold is going to be key to how Pittsburgh looks in this game here. You couple that with the fact that T. Higgins has been on the injury report, and he's been limited both Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday's practices. So there are some injuries worth keeping an eye on and what could affect how this game looks for. But, I mean, both these teams come in very motivated with plenty to play for. Pittsburgh, again, division title hopes on the line depending on what breaks in that Baltimore game. I would assume Baltimore handles business, though, and at that point, they're just trying to keep their division rival out of the playoffs. And with Tua potentially out for the Dolphins game, and on top of that, it's going to be cold in the Meadowlands, and then I mean, if Denver somehow, some way doesn't find a way to beat the backup squad in Kansas City, there is a legitimate chance for them. So I think Cincinnati comes in pretty motivated. And in my hypothetical scenario here of Baltimore winning, maybe that leaves them with a little bit more edge in this game here because Pittsburgh will have lost their playoff dreams of winning the division. And in that case, I'll take the Bengals 24-17, getting the job done and at least setting things up for a potential playoff berth if the rest of the AFC seeding breaks their way. Now, moving into Sunday's contest here, first one we're looking at going into the NFC South are the Carolina Panthers going into Atlanta to take on the Falcons. Playoff hopes are slim, but they are alive for Atlanta here, needing a win, and on top of that, a Tampa Bay loss to find themselves in the playoff bracket. That being said, for the way I see this game going, it really comes down to Atlanta and just how they play this game offensively. You have a rookie quarterback who is going through the ebbs and flows at the end of the season and some meaningful games over the last few weeks for this team, just considering how tight the NFC South has been for them. But you have a rookie quarterback. You're going up against a defense that has been awful, and I mean awful, defending the run for the last month and some change. Over the last 5 games, Carolina has allowed no less than 200 yards rushing. That is incredible for them to be in that position. They're allowing about 30 yards per game more than the second place team when it comes to rushing yards. Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier should be feasting in this contest to make it easy for your rookie quarterback. Give him a good opportunity to just, again, get another game under his belt. Obviously, give him the opportunity to play with his, use his arm, do what he does. But this is one of those games where you make it easy for your rookie. You run the football, you run the football, you run the football. And on the flip side of things, defensively, Atlanta, their defense has finally figured out a pass rush. You look at their last 5 games, 21 sacks over the duration of those 5. You have yourself set up for a nice, easy win, and then you can just cross your fingers and hope for the best, and maybe Tampa Bay finds a way to blow it against New Orleans. But Atlanta needs to just pound the rock. I'm going to take the Falcons. I have them winning 26-18. I wouldn't be shocked to see Carolina maybe play them a little bit close as guys are just trying to, prove themselves on a team that at this point in the season has really nothing to play for other than just putting some game tape on for some of the guys that might not be in Carolina next year. So I like Carolina to keep it somewhat close, but the Falcons should be able to get the job done here. Keyword should be 26-18. Next, we'll look at the NFC East, not West, East, as the Washington Commanders go into Dallas to take on the Cowboys. Even with the playoff spot locked up, the Commanders do have something worth playing for here. Going in as the number 6 seed as it currently stands would mean facing the Rams, who are currently 10-6, instead of the Eagles at 13-3. Packers have an easier opponent with Chicago this week, and that is the other team that is vying for that number 6 spot. So if you're Washington, you want to come away with a win here. I would assume that you would much rather play a team like the Rams, who, don't get me wrong, feel like one of those teams you might sneakily overlook, but I think you're probably more comfortable facing them than you are a Philadelphia Eagles team that's fully healthy, even with the fact that the Commanders just beat the Eagles a few weeks ago. And I've talked about this, bit of an asterisk on the game because Jalen Hurts got knocked out pretty early in that contest. It was a second drive. So it's one of those things where you're probably better off facing the Rams in your first playoff game and then the Eagles in the second round if they wind up making it through themselves. Cowboys last week, minus CeeDee Lamb, have just looked like they're a completely different offense. And that was something that I was kind of expecting, and I even talked about in my preview for that game. And without him, that felt like the final straw that broke the camel's back. This is one of those teams that has been hanging on by threads and has looked really good. And Rico Dowdle having a really good opportunity on the ground kind of took it and ran with it, pun intended, I guess you could say. And with the loss of CeeDee Lamb, now you don't really have that threat that defenses need to key in on in the passing game, and they can kind of focus more on the ground. So it effectively bottles up what Rico Dowdle's been doing, and it makes things tougher for Cooper Rush as well because defenses aren't buying the pass as much. So the way I see it, the last time these two teams played, Washington was a missed extra point away from potentially tying the football game that obviously led to the wild onside kick return touchdown that made the game look a little bit wider than it actually was in the box score. And on top of that, you had 3 turnovers in that game as well. If you can just clean up the turnovers, be a little bit more opportunistic against a really down-and-out Dallas Cowboys team that you know is going to come to play and play you hard. This is a team that a lot of people were writing off in the last matchup between these two. But if you just clean up the turnovers, Jaden Daniels looks like the offensive rookie of the year candidate he has for the duration of this season, and you just bottle up Rico Dowdle, who had a solid game the first time two teams played, 86 yards on the ground, 4.5 yards per carry. I do think the Commanders should be able to get the job done despite having to go into Jerry's world here, but I will take the Commanders 27-20. Expect it to be a little bit closer, but this should be a game the Commanders are winning because there is some decent incentive for them. They should have a little bit of more motivation coming into this one than Dallas does. Next, we're looking at Chicago going into Green Bay to take on the Packers, and I just alluded to this a second ago here. The Packers fighting for an opportunity to maybe find themselves in the number 6 seed if the Commanders stumble against Dallas here. So they do have something to play for, but Chicago, a team that has felt down and out for quite some time now. You look no further than that Thanksgiving game. The firing of Matt Eberflus was a necessity. Do not get me wrong, but this offense has scored no more than 17 points since he was fired from the team. And aside from last Thursday, I would argue the defense has suffered even more because of that firing, with 104 points allowed between weeks 14 to 16. Obviously, you had the 6-point game against Seattle, but minus that game, which was in some rain as well, and a Seattle offense that has dealt with some of its own issues this season at certain points, the defense has struggled. The offense has struggled. Everything has basically struggled, and fans included, in Chicago here. I think that Green Bay comes in, especially at Lambeau, feeling pretty good about themselves, a little bit more motivated, opportunity to kind of treat this as like a tune-up game and get yourself ready to go, coming off of a loss from last week, going into the playoffs. I would expect Green Bay gets the win here. This one feels like one of those kind of foregone conclusion games, and that does scare me sometimes because those are usually the games where you walk away with the underdog pulling off an upset win. But it feels like the way Chicago has stood for the last month since they fired Matt Eberflus, this is a team that's kind of tapped out and ready to be done. And I think Green Bay, again, taking the opportunity to just kind of get right after a loss last week before going into the playoffs, sounds good to me. Give me Green Bay 26-13. Next, we'll flip over to the AFC, going to the south side of things. The Jacksonville Jaguars heading into Indianapolis to take on the Colts. Jacksonville has a very storied history since Peyton Manning departed from the Colts of giving the Colts a really tough time, especially in Jacksonville, but even coming up to Indianapolis as well. The biggest thing that I have going for me, or not going for me, but just the biggest thing that I have that's bothering me, I guess I should say, about Indianapolis right now really is the dysfunction that we're seeing from this franchise. And it's even coming out in reports now that there are clearly some issues with Anthony Richardson being the starting quarterback, despite some of the things he's displayed, whether it's, comments he's made about the NFL being easier than college, or that, he tapped himself out of a game because he was too tired for a single play when you're literally in the red zone driving, and players having to individually meet with Richardson. DeForest Buckner was one that was an example being brought up, that he met with Richardson on his own to explain to him, you're the reason I re-signed here. What's going on? You need to step up and elevate yourself here. there is way too much coming out right now for this team, and this could go one of two ways. They can see all this going on, maybe as a team and unit try to rally, but there is the piece of me that is worried that this ship is too far gone, and you're not coming back from this season. This is one of those, like, unfortunately, and you look at the way they lost to the Giants last week. Offensively, sure, you got a lot of points there with Joe Flacco under center, but I mean, the defense has just fallen off of an absolute cliff. And I don't really know if this team's coming back from it. It has me really worried. I mean, you look at they've allowed no less than 24 points since week 9, allowing an average of about 30 points per game in that span from week 9 to now. Jacksonville obviously has their own issues. Their defense has been pretty bad, one of the worst basically all season long. They have the second most yards per game allowed, and they're tied for 4th in touchdowns allowed this season, and they've been one of, if not the worst passing defenses basically since week 1. It feels like they've been allowing nearly 300 yards per game for quite some time. They've been hanging around that like 275 to 280 threshold for quite a bit of the season. So there's a lot of similarity between these two teams, between just injuries and or issues, maybe sprinkle a little bit more dysfunction on the Colts side and more injuries more so on the Jacksonville side. Both the coaches have come under fire at varying points of the season. I think it's maybe gotten a little bit more quiet for Doug Peterson over the last few weeks, whereas it's getting a little bit warmer under Shane Steichen with everything that's going on over there. But the dysfunction really has me worried about Indianapolis. And so with that, I'm actually going to go Jacksonville in this one here, getting it done. I think defenses maybe get pushed to the wayside a bit. We see a little bit of a higher scoring affair, but I think I'm going to take the Jaguars 28-27 here. I wouldn't be shocked to see Indianapolis maybe finish the season off with a win with everything that's going on and them rallying around that. But I can't, in good faith, go with a team that is having as many problems as they're having right now. It's just not a comfortable pick for me, in my opinion. Now we'll look at the AFC East and the Buffalo Bills going into New England to take on the Patriots. Josh Allen's going to be allowed to start, but his play time is going to be limited here. So Buffalo not really having anything to play for. They are locked in as the number 2 seed. I would expect most of the game to be played by Mitch Trubisky. I mean, you could look at like the wrinkle of maybe wanting to lose this game just because it screws up the Patriots draft position, and that is a possibility, but the crazy thing is at least my feeling towards the Patriots right now, I don't know if this team is better than a backup-led Buffalo Bills team. That's just how poorly I think of this roster altogether. It sounds like Drake May is going to play for them, but I mean, you have the concern of like concussion issue with Christian Gonzalez. He might not be able to play this week, so if this was like a completely Drake May-less team, I would be all in on Buffalo getting the win here pretty comfortably. But with Christian Gonzalez potentially missing the game because of his concussion, I would just be willing to let him sit out for the sake of just preserving his health at this point. Like, you have nothing literally to play for. There's obviously the Gerard Mayo trying to play for his job, because it seems like things are getting pretty loud in New England now. But it would not surprise me in the slightest if the Patriots somehow come away with a win here, screwing up their perfect draft position, because right now they hold the keys to the draft. They should be picking number 1. They should be taking this loss here so they can control everything that happens beneath them. They dictate the way the draft gets going and what happens with that number 1 selection. There is no team, in my opinion, in the NFL right now that could benefit more from having that number 1 overall pick than the New England Patriots. Being able to secure as much capital as possible with that pick, with whatever they decide to do there, because I'm assuming they trade back, and just being able to kind of dictate how the ebbs and flows of the early portion of the draft go with whatever it is that they get. I mean, obviously, you assume ego-driven sport like the NFL, like football, and just the way the NFL is, teams aren't going to lose on purpose. But in my opinion, the Patriots would be better off losing here. And I still think that Buffalo, even with backups, should be able to win this game. Despite how close the first game was, that was clearly looking past your opponent. Maybe they're doing a bit of that again here. Sean McDermott's comments about this game even kind of sounded like they are, because they're focusing on the Patriots, but also trying to get ahead and look towards their next opponent. I still think the Bills win, though. I don't believe in this Patriots team. I really do not. Give me the Bills 20-17. It should be tight once again, but I do think that Buffalo has enough in the tank, even with guys sitting, that they should still get the job done and win here. This next one has the Giants going into Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, another NFC East matchup here. even with guys resting in this game for Philadelphia, like it sounds like Saquon Barkley will not see the field here. He's going to let some of the other guys go in the running back room, and I'm assuming we'll see some other guys miss this game as well as Philadelphia gets set for their number 2 seed position and the best team in the wild card round for the NFC side. I've considered Philadelphia one of the deepest rosters in the NFL all season long, and that has been my thought for a vast majority of the year. I would say once the first few weeks went by, because I did have some concern about the defense, once the defense tightened up and we really started to see what this team was, even like early in that streak of wins that they were having, I was really starting to see, okay, this team is as deep as the roster should be based off of guys that they've brought in via free agency, via drafting and whatnot, and guys they've retained. With that in mind, I feel like even if it's Kenny Pickett at quarterback and like Kenneth Gainwell is your lead running back for the matchup, whoever it is, if you're missing A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, or maybe just one or the other and they just play limited snaps, whatever it may be, I would still expect the Philadelphia Eagles to be able to go in, especially at home in Philly, and get the job done against the Giants here. That's just how poorly I view the Giants right now. And don't get me wrong, watching them put up 45 last week against Indianapolis was quite the sight to behold. But the Philadelphia Eagles are not the Colts in even the slightest manner. And I think, again, that defense being as deep as it is should be able to come in, give the Giants offense some problems, as the Giants offense has had problems all season long. I don't think we're going to see Drew Lock getting 5 touchdowns again against Philadelphia, even if it is some of the backups playing. Give me the Eagles, and I think they win 28-13. I think that this team is deep enough to give them a lot of issues, and it shouldn't be too much of a problem even with backups in. And Kenny Pickett, for what it's worth, did enough last week. Granted, a lot of the work was all thanks to Saquon Barkley. I still think that this team has enough in the tank to get a good, comfortable win here and finish up 14-3 on the season, right? It still feels weird saying that. Even though we've been on 17 games for a handful of years now, still feels weird saying things like that. The next one, NFC South. Saints going into Tampa Bay to take on the Buccaneers. Tampa Bay does have seeding plus the NFC South to play for here. As it currently stands, they are the number 4 seed. They will play the number 5 seed if they win this game, which is Detroit or Minnesota, depending on who wins that Sunday Night Football matchup. A win this week and a Rams loss would get them out of that matchup. So if the Rams do find a way to lose to Seattle and they get the win here, that means they're facing either Green Bay or Washington, which is a far more favorable matchup in my eyes. Even if, Tampa Bay did have a win earlier in the season over Detroit, that was week 2. Vastly different teams on both ends at this point in the season here. Completely different teams. So I would say that going in and winning here, probably what you want to do, and something I would not be too surprised to see from Tampa Bay. You look at New Orleans and just how battered and bruised they've been for quite some time now, and it basically started as early as like week number 2. They have just been decimated by injuries. The bug will not let them go, and it's one of those things that has very clearly affected this team, and it's not something that I think is going to magically change in week number 8. There is this weird wrinkle that New Orleans has right now in Raymond James Stadium of winning 5 of their last 6 in Raymond James by an average of 17 points. I did notice that when I was going through some numbers and reading through some articles for this matchup here. I do think that's a wild thing to actually have going on right now, but it's not something that I look at and go, oh, well, maybe we need to consider New Orleans a little bit more here. At the end of the day, if Spencer Rattler's the starting quarterback and the offense is the way it is right now, there's no reason for me to believe that the Saints get the job done here, and especially how motivated Tampa Bay is to try to get into the playoffs at home. This one feels like a wash in my eyes. I mean, there's just you're not going to have Marshawn Lattimore, obviously, who played the last time these two teams matched up because he's been traded. Paulson Adebo's injured. He's not going to be playing. At this point here, it feels like Tampa Bay's going to find themselves a pretty comfortable victory, and I have them winning 35-14. The next contest we're going to look at is going to be an AFC South clash between the Houston Texans and the Tennessee Titans here. Texans, in a bit of a bad way, if you'd ask me, obviously struggling over the last few weeks, even to find points. Never mind just struggling in general. It has been a tough way for this Houston Texans team, dealing with injuries, both in the wide receiver room, offensive line as well. It's not been going great for Houston. And then on the flip side of things, you, of course, have a Tennessee Titans team that has been having quite a season sitting at 3-13. Now, Based off comments made by D'Amico Ryans, it sounds like the Texans are going to come into this game and they're going to come in with something to prove. They're not just going to look past the Titans en route to the playoffs here. And that honestly is for good reason. And I agree with the reasons for why, from what D'Amico Ryans was saying. This is a team that has not been in the best position, and they need to kind of get themselves right and feeling good going into the playoffs. Otherwise, you are looking at a very clear-cut one-and-done team. So this is a team that should be coming in and should be somewhat motivated to play, to try to right the ship before they get into the thick of things in the playoff tournament. Now, biggest thing to watch as far as this contest goes is basically what happens in the trenches here. Both these teams compiling up a whopping 34 pressures and 12 sacks combined between the two teams. You had 8 sacks from Houston and 4 from Tennessee, and then basically splitting the pressure count. Both these defensive fronts feature a ton of really good talent. You got Jeffrey Simmons and Harold Landry leading the way in Tennessee, and of course Will Anderson, Danielle Hunter, the big names on the edges for the defensive line in Houston there. I do think that however that breaks out, whichever offensive line winds up holding up best in this game could be conducive to who comes away with the win here. You also have the potential of Tony Pollard being back this week. He obviously missed last week with the flu and ankle thing going on. He's somebody who should be coming in this game pretty motivated, if you'd ask me, about 83 yards away from hitting a $250,000 incentive. So I would assume, considering the last time he played the Texans, about 119 yards, touchdown, 5 yards per attempt in that game, he's going to want to come in and try to run himself down the football field at least once so he can hit that $250,000 bonus. The other thing to keep in mind, quarterbacks in this game here, obviously, you got C.J. Stroud on Houston's end, but Tennessee, it sounds like both of the quarterbacks are going to get an opportunity to play in this based off of comments from Coach Callahan in Tennessee. So keep an eye on what happens there, whether it's Mason Rudolph or Will Levis. I don't really know how they're going to go into this game, and it's crazy because Tennessee is pretty favored in this game as well. If they're going to be flip-flopping quarterbacks, how they're supposed to come away with a win here. It's just one of those things that feels like this is a team trying to just kind of see one last time what they have with both of these guys to determine whether they want to try to keep them around next year, whereas Houston's at least coming in and their goal is, according to the head coach, to get right, not look past your opponent, and get yourself ready for the playoffs by feeling good coming out of this game about what you're doing, both offensively and defensively. So I know Tennessee took them to the absolute limit the last time these two teams played, ultimately coming out with a victory here. But I think I'm going to lean Texans on this one. I'll take them 23-21, maybe a little bit lower, a little more lower scoring than the first time these two teams played around. But I agree with what D'Amico Ryans is saying. It seems like this team needs to kind of win this football game to put themselves in a position to feel good about what they're doing. I don't really think coming away with a loss here helps, that like resting and then just losing and then going into the playoffs. I don't think that really helps them in any way. It honestly just compounds the issues that you've been dealing with. I think the Texans need to come in, they need to play hard, and they need to win this football game because this is a team that they should have beat the first time around. And if you go 0-2 against the Titans, who are literally, if 2 of the 4 wins that Tennessee has to come season end is against you, that's a bit of a problem in my eyes for Houston. So with that, again, I'll take the Texans 23-21, kind of quiet the demons a little bit that you've been dealing with over the last few weeks here, get the ship right and going in the correct direction as you march your way into the playoffs as the AFC South Division champion and go in with double-digit wins rather than sitting at a 9-8 record where people are looking at you going, does this team really belong here kind of deal? Now we'll have the San Francisco 49ers heading into Arizona to take on the Cardinals. San Fran having won just 1 game in their last 7. Arizona, though, on the flip side, not doing much better themselves, having won just 1 game in their last 6. Both of these teams kind of crashing and burning at the end of the season here after, what was a possibility of them being in a much better position, maybe even a playoff position when you look at where they were about a couple of months ago. The nerve injury to Brock Purdy, I believe his elbow is where it is on his throwing arm, seems to be problematic enough that I would assume he does not play. And even if he was playing, Brock Purdy's play this season has definitely raised some concerns in my eyes. I know there's obviously a lot of injuries that this team has dealt with, both offensively and defensively, but definitely offensively. And it's easy to point to a lot of that, but we have seen some decision making that has definitely made me waver a little bit in my personal confidence in Brock Purdy over there. I do still think he's a good quarterback, and honestly, it feels like with what he's been doing in San Francisco, if the team comes back next year, they're a lot healthier. He's in a better spot. This probably all goes away. But there is the fact that we have seen some really bad interceptions from Purdy as recently as last week, with 2 of them just being sailed straight to Kirby Joseph and basically throwing the football game away. And that's not the first time we've seen bad interceptions throwing away football games from Purdy this year. So even if it's just Josh Dobbs or it's Brock Purdy, maybe I feel a little bit better with Purdy under center, but with the way he's been struggling, I don't know how I feel, to be completely honest with you. And with Dobbs under center, I mean, we'll see what we get. Josh Dobbs feels like such a hit or miss. Last year it was, is he the Vikings guy at quarterback when Kirk Cousins was absent with injury, and now that's done its ebbs and flows and its highs and its lows, and now at this point here, it's like you never really know what you're going to get from Josh Dobbs in the past or not. The other thing is just some injuries as well. When you look at San Francisco altogether, they had 9 different players that did not practice Wednesday or Thursday. As of this recording, I don't have a report for Friday's injury report, but 9 different players did not practice both Wednesday and Thursday. It feels like San Francisco is coming into this game pretty thin, and I would expect some guys to not be playing in this game just because of where this season has gone and where it currently stands and how nothing will change if they win this football game. I think I'm going to lean Arizona, just a healthier team in Arizona, and one of these teams has to win, so I think I'm going to take the team that feels a little bit healthier in my eyes and will at least have their starting quarterback. If you just want to simplify it, which quarterback you taking, I think I'll take Kyler Murray over Josh Dobbs. James Conner isn't playing in this game. That is a little bit of a concern in my eyes for the Arizona offense, but just based on, quarterback battle alone, home field advantage Arizona in my eyes. The AFC West, the Chiefs, going into Denver to take on the Broncos. Carson Wentz is the starter for Kansas City here. I'm actually pretty excited to see how this goes. Carson Wentz, obviously the story has been one of the more interesting ones of the NFL. MVP season cut short to injury. Eagles win the Super Bowl with Nick Foles, and from there, Carson Wentz kind of becomes a journeyman trying to find his place in the NFL from that point forward. This is another offense where Carson Wentz gets the opportunity working with one of the best offensive masterminds in the league in Andy Reid and getting to flex his stuff in that offense. It's just one of those things that I'm actually looking forward to seeing because Carson Wentz has shown promise at certain points in his career, but we've also seen some of the bad from Carson Wentz. On the flip side, Denver obviously needs to win this football game if they want to get themselves into the playoffs here. A loss here opens the door for either Miami or Cincinnati to get themselves in. This is one that I'm sure Denver coming in is probably itching to get back from Kansas City. Obviously, losing to Kansas City on that blocked field goal, 19-17 way back. That's one of those things that I'm sure sits with you all season long. And honestly, if that doesn't happen and you win that football game, your playoff spot is secure and you're not sitting here worrying about winning this football game. Yes, you can come in, but you don't have the pressure of that here. So this is one of those that I know Denver's coming in motivated trying to get back here. I'm very curious to see how Kansas City just goes about this game overall, though, because I'm assuming Kansas City is not just going to roll over and let their division rival, the Denver Broncos, just walk into the playoffs. I would assume Kansas City is going to come in with a pretty good game plan, and even with Carson Wentz at quarterback, I do think that they're still going to be able to move the football. We've seen some cracks from this Denver Broncos defense as of late and as recently as last week, and I know Joe Burrow and the Bengals are a different group than a Kansas City-led team by Carson Wentz, but I think it's more so what Kansas City's defense looks like in this game here because that's where I think the Kansas City win, despite Carson Wentz starting, comes from. If the defense really gives Bo Nix some problems and Steve Spagnuolo is, just making it an absolute nightmare for a rookie quarterback in Bo Nix, I could actually see Kansas City coming away with the win here. But, big but here though, I do think the Denver Broncos get this one. I can't buy in on Carson Wentz, even if it is in Kansas City, just based off what I've seen from him. And I've seen a lot of Carson Wentz, Colts fans, so seen a lot of Carson Wentz, and at this stage in his career, I don't really know where he is, where his head is at or anything. I'll be curious to see what happens here, but something tells me Sean Payton will have his guys ready to play, and Denver will ultimately end what has been a bit of a Cinderella run for the Bengals trying to claw their way back into the playoffs. So give me Denver, 1-point win, 20-19, as Kansas City's probably settling for field goals in my eyes, and it just ends up not being quite enough to take down Denver this time around. Next, we'll look at the NFC West in a game that basically got locked up due to a handful of tiebreakers last week. The Seahawks going into Los Angeles, even if they win this game, they go to 10-7. Rams drop to 10-7. Does not matter. The Rams are the division winners of the NFC West. I was actually hoping that this game would break and end up being an NFC West championship match, but it's not. That being said, the Rams, in theory, do have something to play for here, and that is the number 3 seed. But based off of what Sean McVay was saying just in some interviews leading up to this game, it sounds like he wants to give the guys that need the rest they need, and ultimately just kind of get themselves ready for the wild card. I think this really just comes down to how much really gets put into this game from Sean McVay and his personnel side of things. Like that's really kind of how I look at it right now. Jimmy Garoppolo is going to be the starting quarterback for LA, and I'm not his biggest believer. If you followed me long enough during Jimmy Garoppolo's tail end in San Francisco, I think you knew very clearly how I felt about him as a quarterback. But what Sean McVay does and the Sean McVay effect it has on some quarterbacks, I think is very real. I think what he did in the short time with Baker Mayfield was really impressive. So for me, Garoppolo's been the backup all season long. He's been there. He has been in the system. He should know the system at this point to get this opportunity to put on a show. You're working with a good offense. Yeah, there's going to be probably a lot of guys not playing. Like you don't expect to see Cooper Kupp. Don't expect to see Kyron Williams. You're going to see Blake Corum more. I'm assuming Puka Nacua is probably going to get some action. And here being a younger guy, I'm assuming he wants to play. I think having him in there is not the biggest deal in the world. I think having him at least going is good for you. But then on top of that, you might see some backups on the O-line as well. And there's also the slight chance that Sean McVay might not even be playing play calling. That was also something that was alluded to as well. It might be Mike LaFleur. So at this point, my biggest concern with Seattle is their O-line and how they'll perform. They've allowed the 4th most sacks this season. They have not been great protecting Geno Smith this season, and you have a pretty young and feisty group on the defensive side in Los Angeles that could pose an issue. But it sounds like the Rams are kind of looking past Seattle, and I do think Seattle gets to take advantage of that. But it is still a Sean McVay-led team, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the Rams really make Seattle work for that win. So I'll take the Seahawks, but I'll take them 23-22. Not a runaway or anything like that. I think the Rams keep it close the whole way, but Seattle playing motivated, wanting to get that 10th win of the season just to make a little bit of a point. I could see them winning this football game. Moving into the AFC, but staying in the West, the Chargers heading into Las Vegas to take on the Raiders. Raiders have been fighting and moving further down the draft board for the last couple of weeks, and Antonio Pierce made it very clear this team is not here to lose. They are trying to win football games. You even saw Mark Davis celebrating in the locker room with them after not last week's win, but maybe the week prior. I can't remember when it was. But that being said, the Chargers do have something worth playing for in this game here, and I do think it is something worth mentioning. With a win, and if the Pittsburgh Steelers end up losing to the Cincinnati Bengals, they could jump to the number 5 seed. Pittsburgh and Cincinnati obviously play on Saturday, so based off what happens there, you will know just how motivated this Chargers team is coming into this game here. That would put them in line to face the Texans in the wild card round if they move to the number 5 seed, because right now, as it stands, Texans are going to be number 4. That is motivation enough in my eyes to get yourself into the playoffs, one, but also to get yourself what I would consider a favorable matchup. Like, yes, you're going to go into Houston, but the Texans, the way they have looked, you probably feel pretty good about that. And I am, from the way things look right now with how injured Houston is and how tough of a football team Jim Harbaugh has coached this Chargers to be, I wouldn't be too, I would be inclined to want to try to win this football game, is basically what I'm getting at here. Slowing down rookie phenom Brock Bowers is obviously going to be the key to success for the Chargers here. Bowers currently 8 receptions shy of breaking the tight end receptions record at 116, head by Zach Ertz. On the flip side, you got J.K. Dobbins, who came back from injury for the Chargers at literally the perfect time. No better time than a week prior to the final week of the season to get him going, knock off the rust. Now he can really get himself moving this week, and then things could really open up for this offense in the playoffs here. So between him, obviously you got Ladd McConkey you're dealing with as well, Justin Herbert, an offensive line that has 2 bookend tackles that I really, really like. This is a team that should be motivated. And on top of all that, the little bit of a wrinkle, which is something I'm sure the Chargers haven't forgotten. It wasn't too long ago, as recently as last season, this Las Vegas team put 63 on LA. Now, I know Jim Harbaugh wasn't around, but there was a lot of other guys that were still on this team that were around for that. I would not be shocked, even if that number 5 seed dream is evaporated completely, that the Chargers don't still want to come in and just hand Las Vegas a loss anyways, just because rivalry. I'll take the Chargers 24-16. I expect Jim Harbaugh to have his team ready to go, whether that number 5 seed is in play or not. Motivation not needed whatsoever. There's already plenty there. Bit of bad blood between these two teams as of late, so I'll take the Chargers coming in motivated to win, whether it really matters or not. This next one, this is a tough one because I don't really know exactly what's going to happen here. Miami going into New York to take on the Jets. Tua's availability is obviously up in the air. Hip injury is a problem. The fact that Mike McDaniel had to even discuss the potential for surgery is one of those things that if it's being talked about, it makes me nervous. I really hope he's fine. I hope it's not something that he has to deal with, but it is definitely something that I think is worth mentioning that the head coach even had. And even if it is because reporters are asking, the fact that it's being asked, that just scares me because it makes you wonder just how severe that injury is if it's being brought up. This is another one of those games where between that and also pointing to the weather might spell a Miami Dolphins loss. The high for Sunday in East Rutherford is going to be 35 degrees. That's just the high for that day. It might be a little bit lower because kickoff is around 4:30 or something like that, and sunset it's around like 4:20 or whatever it may be. Or maybe it's flip-flopped. I might be misremembering which is which. But that being said, we're looking at a game that's probably going to dip well close to 30 degrees, maybe even a little bit less as that sun goes down because it's a later game and it's in New York. For those of you that may not remember, this was talked about a lot. Dolphins were 0-10 going into that Kansas City playoff game last year. Sub 40 degree weather, got their asses kicked. Now, this is a Jets team that's not in a great way. There is a lot of drama going on in all aspects. They're trying to get serious and, they're working on interviews, trying to find their next head coach, their next GM, yada, yada, yada. If you have 17-year-olds running your football team, they don't really know how serious you can be taken. Aaron Rodgers seems more up in the air about what his career is going to look like going into this offseason than I think I've ever heard at any point. So there is a lot of concern on the Jets' end, but Miami is now 0-11 in those same games, in their last 11 games when the weather is below 40 degrees. And I don't know if I can take Snoop Huntley over Aaron Rodgers. And even with the way Aaron Rodgers has looked all this season, I think I'm going to have to go with the home team, with the better quarterback. I would, at this stage, at least be comfortable saying with when I'm comparing Snoop Huntley to Aaron Rodgers. Something tells me Miami season's going to come to an unfortunate close here. Even if Tua does play, the health thing scares me. If he gets brought down, and the defensive front in New York has been disruptive at times this year, it's worrisome to me. I would not be shocked to see Tua not play this game, and if that's how the Miami Dolphins season ends, that's really unfortunate. But at this point right now, it feels like Miami's clinging to a playoff dream that just doesn't really make sense at this point. So I'll take the Jets. I don't think it's going to be a clear-cut win. I think maybe the Dolphins hang around, but I'll take the Jets 20-17. But there's just a lot that's scaring me from Miami right now. And then to wrap up this season, the main event of what could be the entire year at this point here, the Minnesota Vikings going into Detroit to take on the Lions. Two of the NFL's best going head-to-head, one-on-one. You have Detroit, their offense, averaging 33.3 points per game to Minnesota's 26.4. Both teams have positive double-digit turnover margins, 10 and 11 for the Vikings and Lions respectively. Minnesota is 9-1 in their close games this season to Detroit's 7-2. You have Jared Goff and Sam Darnold, who rank first and second in passing touchdowns since Week 11 respectively. So first for Goff, second for Darnold. Detroit can run through a literal wall if you need them to, even without David Montgomery. You have Jahmyr Gibbs, as effective as just about anyone, who runs harder than just about anyone in the NFL and is one of the faster running backs I feel like I've seen in the NFL to this point right now. Then Minnesota, you of course have Sam Darnold, who is having a career season. You got Justin Jefferson, best wide receiver in the NFL in my eyes. There is plenty of firepower on both sides of this game for the opposing, or for both teams' offenses. Now, for me though, what I think is going to make the difference is going to be defense. And that's where the conversation gets deep here. It's not really about what these offenses are going to do, because I'll be honest, I think they're going to put up a ton of points. And there's a reason for that. As it currently stands, and again, not a betting channel, as we mentioned earlier, but as it currently stands, the over-under is currently set for 56.5. People are expecting points for this game. Now, that kind of feels like a trap to me, because it would just not surprise me if the over-under is 56.5 and we literally somehow only get like 43 points, like something crazy. The game ends up being like 22-21, something weird like that. But I do expect points in this game here, and it's really going to come down to whichever defense makes the biggest plays when it matters the most. Now, Minnesota boasts one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. They're third in pressures, fourth in sacks, and a lot of that has to do with them being first in overall blitz rate by like 3%. They are the definitive blitzing team in the NFL. Nobody sends extra guys the way Minnesota does. Now, that aggressiveness does come with a bit of a price. They are fifth in passing yards per game allowed this year, but that aggressiveness has also turned into them coming away with the most interceptions so far this season at 22. They're also first in total takeaways with 31 on the season. So they're an aggressive defense, whether it's the way they get after the quarterback or the way they try to get after the football. It does burn them at times, but they can come away with the big play when necessary. Detroit's defense is kind of similar. They're not nearly as effective when it comes to getting to the quarterback, but they do generate a decent amount of pressure. But the injuries are the big thing that are weighing on me, and I cannot ignore what we've seen from this Lions defense over the last few weeks. With 130 points allowed in their last 4 games as a 32.5 points per game average. You can thank Chicago that number's not anywhere like higher, because if Chicago was even slightly competent in the current state that they're in right now, that number's probably pushing closer to like 140, and your average is looking at like 33, maybe 34 points per game. I will say, though, that Detroit, 8th in takeaways themselves in total, they do come up with some big plays when they need it most as well. And you can look no further than literally last week with the San Francisco 49ers kind of giving them some problems defensively early. But Kirby Joseph, yeah, he was, right place, right time situation, but coming up with big interceptions when you needed a big turnover to swing the game. And it literally swung the game your direction and then helped put the game away as well. So good positioning by Joseph, taking advantage of poor plays from the quarterback. Both of these defenses come up big when you need them, but they are not prone to letting themselves also get beat as well. Whoever comes up with that big takeaway, that big turnover, especially in like the waning minutes of the game, I think comes away with the win here. That all being said, for my final pick of the regular season, in what is arguably the biggest game in the NFL this season, because it literally dictates the number 1 seed in the NFC, who I think I'm going to have as the winner, I've got to go with the Minnesota Vikings. I have picked against them way too many times this season, and I think it's about time that I pick a game where I feel confident that there is a real chance for them to win this game. This is one of these teams that I still cannot believe that their record is 14-2. I cannot believe the work that has been done by Kevin O'Connell with Sam Darnold, but every single week that goes by, I'm floored, I'm blown away, and at this point, I can't deny it any further. I really like what Minnesota has done. They are one of the more complete teams in the NFL at this current point right now. I will be very curious to see how Sam Darnold fares in some playoff football, but as it stands right now, the way that Detroit defense is just battered and bruised with so many guys hurt, it's hard for me to want to fully invest and believe in that defense. I really do think the Lions have every chance to win this game, especially with it being in Detroit. I have Minnesota winning 31-29, but if it's Detroit winning 31-29, believe me, I would not be surprised. I think this is really just a matter of like, what team do you believe in more kind of deal. But I think I'm going to go Minnesota. That Brian Flores defense, the amount of pressure that they can bring and just how aggressive they are at getting after the football is a big reason why this team is where they are. Like, yeah, Detroit, they're averaging 33 points per game, near like almost 33 and a half. Like, that's crazy. And Minnesota, they're 26 and a half or so, give or take, whatever the actual number was, 26.4. But the big reason why they haven't needed that 30-plus points per game is because of how good this defense has been and what Brian Flores has been able to do with the guys that they have over there. So that being said, Minnesota, give me the W. I'll take them for my final pick for the 2024 NFL season. Fire away in that comment section down below. Again, let me know what you like. What do you dislike? Who are you rooting for? Who are you rooting against? Fire away and let me hear from you all. But as always, if you made it to the end, greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.